The forest was a shroud of evergreen, an endless sea of pines and firs that whispered secrets in the wind. It cradled my cabin, the last outpost of humanity before the wild reclaimed its dominion, a lone sentinel amongst giants. From the porch, I could stare into the verdant abyss, and it would stare back, indifferent to the man who dared to make a home at its fringe. Nothing but the occasional caw of a raven broke the silence, reinforcing just how cut off I was from everything resembling the world I once knew. Another day I murmured to the trees, watching as fog curled around their trunks like wraiths dancing at dawn. No response, as expected. Solitude was a demanding companion, silent yet oppressive in its constant presence. I stepped off the wooden planks, my boots sinking slightly into the loamy soil, damp with the morning's dew. The scent of earth and pine needles filled my nostrils, a smell I'd come to associate with peace, a far cry from the acrid stench of gunpowder and blood that once painted every breath. Dan, I chided myself softly, keep your head here, not there. But memories are relentless predators. They stalk you, waiting for your guard to drop. As a ranger, I learned to be vigilant, to anticipate the strike. But in these woods, my enemies were phantoms of my own making, specters of war that clung to me more stubbornly than the mud on my boots. Stop. I did stop, freezing in place. Not because of the command. I gave it to myself, but because of the stillness that suddenly enveloped the woods. A chill traced the length of my spine, nature's eerie quietude filling the void left by my halted footsteps. Something primal within me recognized this silence as a prelude to danger. Probably just a deer, I reasoned, though the hand that once steadied a rifle was now clenched at my side. My eyes scoured the tree line, seeking out any movement, any hint of life, aside from my own labored breathing. The isolation of this place was both a balm and a curse. It ebbed away the chaos of war, only to replace it with an unnerving tranquility where every snapped twig sounded like a footstep, every shadow a lurking threat. Nothing's there, I insisted, though my voice lacked conviction. It was a strange thing to yearn for solitude yet to fear the very isolation I sought. In Afghanistan, the enemy was flesh and bone. Here, in the depths of the wilderness, the enemy wore my face, haunted my thoughts, turned respite into a battlefield of a different kind. Get a grip, Dan. The words slipped out between gritted teeth as I forced my feet forward, my gaze fixed on the clearing ahead where my garden awaited. You're safe. This is your sanctuary. But even as the words formed a shield around my heart, the forest loomed large around me, a reminder that some wars are never truly left behind, and some battlefields are as much within us as they are underfoot. Chores first, I muttered to myself, stepping into the cool embrace of dawn. My fingers worked methodically, checking the lines of the snares I'd set the night before. Each motion was deliberate, a step in a well-rehearsed routine that kept the chaos at bay. The crunch of fallen leaves underfoot was a percussion that marked time as I patrolled the perimeter. My boots found familiar grooves in the earth, the paths worn by countless similar treks. Always the same circuit. Every morning I reminded myself, as if forgetting would mean slipping back into the abyss from which I'd come. The sun hung low in the sky, a hazy orb that filtered through the dense canopy of pines and firs surrounding my cabin. The air was still carrying the scent of loam and growing things. I stepped out, the wooden porch creaking underfoot, and made my way to the small clearing I had cultivated into a vegetable garden. All right, let's see how you're doing, I muttered to the plants as if they could respond, kneeling beside the first row of tender green shoots. My fingers were methodical, plucking unwelcome weeds with a soldier's precision, each invasive plant an enemy to be vanquished from my sanctuary. Sweat beaded on my brow, not from exertion, but from the intensity of focus. This was more than gardening. It was a ritual, a fight for life amidst memories of death. With the garden tended, I stood and dusted off my hands, casting a wary glance at the enclosing woods. There was a quietness there that seemed too deep, as if waiting to be filled by something sinister. Shaking off the unease, I grabbed my fishing gear and headed toward the creek, the sound of flowing water slowly overtaking the silence. Gotcha. The word erupted from me, triumphant, as the rod bent and I reeled in my catch. Nice try, but not today, I said to the trout as I unhooked it, admiring its iridescent scales that shimmered with life. For a fleeting second, I saw not the fish, but the reflection of a man who'd once been a soldier, now searching for redemption in the ripple of a creek. Back you go, I continued, releasing the trout back into the water. Its disappearance beneath the surface was like a secret shared, a pact between the wilderness and me. We were both survivors, after all. Tomorrow, I promised the forest, my words hanging in the air as I gathered my gear. We'll do this dance again. And with that, I turned back towards the cabin, the weight of solitude settling on my shoulders, a mantle I bore with equal parts resignation and resolve. The underbrush crunched softly under my boots as I made my way to the first of several traps I'd set out along the perimeter of my territory. The forest was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves that whispered secrets only the wild could understand. My hands, scarred and steady from years of service, worked with a practiced ease as I checked each trap for signs of success. Empty again, I muttered to the unyielding wilderness, resetting the snare with a precision honed by repetition. It was a dance I knew all too well. Set, check, reset, a rhythm that provided a semblance of control in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. The air was damp with morning dew, thick with the scent of pine and earth, a fragrance that should have been comforting, yet it carried an edge that pricked at my senses. Each snap of twig underfoot resounded like a gunshot in my ears. Each shadow cast by the swaying trees felt like an omen. I approached the next trap, and there, finally, was a rabbit caught within the metal jaws. "Sorry, pal," I said almost apologetically as I extracted the animal. Its eyes, wide and unseeing, seemed to pierce through me. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched like grasping fingers across the forest floor. I could feel the weight of the coming dusk. It pressed against me with an almost palpable force, stirring the unease that never quite left my side. "Nothing's going to happen," I spoke into the silence, a feeble attempt to dispel the growing dread. But the words sounded more like a question than a statement, echoing unanswered among the towering pines. The forest seemed to watch me, its gaze impassive yet intense, as if it were waiting for something or someone to shatter the stillness. And in those moments, as the light faded and the darkness crept in, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. "Tomorrow," I whispered, my voice barely more than a breath. "It'll be different." But as I trudged back to my cabin, the promise tasted bitter on my tongue, tainted by the knowledge that while the traps would remain the same, the darkness that awaited me was ever-changing, always lurking just beyond the tree line, ready to ensnare me like the creatures of the forest. The cabin, a solitary sentinel amidst the encroaching gloom, seemed to hunker down as if bracing itself against the coming night. I stepped onto the weathered porch, my boots thudding heavily on the wooden planks, the sound discordant in the encompassing silence of the wilderness. The creak of the door echoed like a gunshot as I entered my refuge, the only shield from the vast expanse of untamed forest that stretched for miles, swallowing any notion of civilization. "Safe," I muttered, locking the door behind me, a ritualistic whisper to ward off the unknown. "Easy," I murmured to myself, my voice barely rising above the rustle of leaves and the groan of bending boughs. "It's just the wind." But even as I spoke, the words felt hollow, swallowed up by the vastness of the woods enveloping my cabin. I stood there, outside the warmth of my shelter, gazing at the forest that had become both my sanctuary and my prison. The trees were dense here, their branches interlocking like the fingers of intertwined hands, forming a barrier that was at once protective and isolating. They moved with the wind, a ceaseless dance that cast moving shadows upon the ground, shadows that twisted and turned in ways that set my nerves on edge. Dan, you're seeing things that aren't there, I chided myself, but the sound of my own name on my lips sent a chill down my spine. The darkness seemed to press in closer, and I could almost feel the weight of unseen eyes upon me. I watched as the boughs undulated, an eerie mimicry of waves on a stormy sea. There was a rhythm to it, a relentless push and pull that matched the unsettled beat of my heart. It was as though the forest itself was breathing, alive with a presence that was not quite natural. The same presence that had been haunting the edges of my consciousness since I returned from a war that never truly left me. Damn this place, I muttered, the frustration clear in my voice. Damn these woods and the tricks they play. But even as I said it, I knew the fault lay not with the trees, but with the man who sought refuge beneath their boughs. Keep it together, Dan. It's just your mind playing games, I thought, trying to anchor myself to reality. Turning back toward the cabin, I glanced once more at the forest. The wind continued to whip through the trees, their branches creaking and groaning like the bones of the earth shifting in restless sleep. And then, ever so faintly, I caught the scent of something, a smell that didn't belong, metallic and out of place. Probably nothing, I reassured myself, yet the unease remained, coiling in my gut like a living thing. Inside, the light from my cabin windows offered a beacon of solace, but the shadows that clung to the periphery suggested that perhaps solace was simply another word for ignorance. Tomorrow, I vowed, I'll check the perimeter again, just to be sure. It was a promise to myself, but more than that, it was a plea. A desperate hope that come morning, the world would make sense once more. But deep down, in a place where words were useless and thoughts took on a life of their own, I knew better. The forest held its breath, and so did I, waiting for the night to reveal its secrets. The night had a way of making the familiar strange shadows stretching across my cabin floor like dark fingers reaching for something just out of sight. I leaned back in the creaky wooden chair, the sharp punctuation in the stillness of the room. My hand trembled slightly as I set down the mug, its contents long since cold. Another peaceful evening, I muttered to myself, the words feeling hollow, even as they left my lips. But peace was a fickle friend, here one moment and gone the next, chased away by the rustling whispers of the forest outside. I stood, the bones in my knees protesting as I moved toward the window, my eyes scanning the dense tree line. That's when I saw it. A fleeting shape, more shadow than substance, moving with an unsettling grace on two legs that should have belonged to a man, but didn't. As I peered into the moonlit wilderness, the creature, or whatever it was, vanished from my sight as if it were never there at all. My heart hammered against my chest, a relentless drum warning of danger, or perhaps heralding madness. Probably just a bear, a big one, I reasoned aloud, my voice barely convincing myself. I stepped outside, the cool air slapping my cheeks, a sobering reminder that my mind could be my worst enemy. I needed to check, to prove to myself it was nothing. Each step felt heavy, laden with dread, as I cautiously made my way around the cabin perimeter, my hand resting on the hunting knife sheathed at my hip, a security blanket I hadn't needed in years. Come out, I half sang to the night, a trick I'd used to steady my nerves before a firefight. Nothing but trees and critters here. But the silence answered back, thick and unyielding, as if the forest itself held its breath. I returned to the cabin, the warmth of the interior doing little to thaw the chill that had settled deep within my bones. The fire crackled mockingly, a beacon of safety that seemed so feeble now. Sleep would not come easy tonight. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind against the windows would be that creature returning to haunt me. And I'd lie there, straining my ears for the impossible, wondering which side of sanity I'd wake up on come morning. The full moon, a witness to the unspeakable, bathed the clearing in an ethereal glow, its light betrayed by the shadows that danced just beyond my sight. There it was, again, a hulking silhouette that seemed to drift between the trees, as if woven from the darkness itself. "Are you real?" I whispered into the void, my voice barely a hitch against the backdrop of rustling leaves. "Or are you just another ghost?" It was vast, larger than any man, standing on two legs with a presence that felt like a gravitational pull. Its fur, blacker than the depths of night, shimmered under the touch of moonlight, alive with an otherworldly sheen. The eyes, though, were what cemented the terror in my gut. Glowing amber, piercing through the veil of night, fixating on me with an intelligence that no mere animal possessed. "Along then," I taunted, a hollow bravado lacing my tone. "Show yourself." I brandished the flashlight like a talisman, its beam slicing through the dark. But all it caught were fragments of movement, a flash of fur here, a glint of those eyes there. Never the whole creature at once. I paced back to the porch, the weight of the rifle in my hands more comforting than the sturdiness of the cabin's walls. With every stride, I scanned the tree line, hoping and dreading to catch another glimpse. It was playing with me. I could feel it in my bones. My heart thrummed a discordant rhythm, my breaths uneven as I tried to steady my aim on nothing but shifting shadows. "Come out!" The shout ripped from my throat, raw and desperate. "What do you want from me?" The forest, in response, grew eerily silent, and for a moment so did I. My mind reeled, grappling with the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the war had never ended. Perhaps it had followed me, morphing into this beast that stalked my nights, leaving me yearning for the clarity of a bullet's path instead of this maddening uncertainty. But as I turned to seek refuge within my cabin once more, there it was, an unmistakable outline against the window pane, its breath fogging the glass momentarily before disappearing into the night. My pulse hammered against my skull, a cacophony of fear that drowned out reason. The world outside had retreated to a mere whisper, but inside my skull it roared. I paced the floorboards of my cabin, each step a thunderous echo in the void left by silence. My fingers brushed against the aged wood of the table, seeking solace in its solidity. Yet nothing could anchor the tempest within. The window pane. The fogged glass had been real. The cold sweat that clung to me was real. The gnawing dread that something out there had eyes full of moonlight and malice was all too real. "Who are you?" I whispered into the emptiness, half hoping for an answer, half terrified it might respond. The rifle leaned against the wall, its dark barrel a stark contrast to the pale logs. It offered a promise of defense, or perhaps offense, against a foe I couldn't even be sure existed. I shivered, a convulsion that seemed to start deep in my marrow and ripple outwards. My hand reached for the rifle instinctively, its familiar weight a morbid comfort. I checked the chamber, the metallic click joining the symphony of my unraveling. "Let's say you were real, huh? What then? You gonna come in here and try your luck?" I taunted the shadows that gathered at the edge of my vision. It was easier that way to turn fear into anger, to pretend I was back in a war zone where the enemy was flesh and blood, not figments of a fractured psyche. "Come on, show yourself." My challenge hung in the air, unanswered. Only the wind, a sly conspirator, whispered through the trees, rustling leaves in a mockery of footsteps. My knees buckled, and I found myself sitting hard on the floor, the rifle across my lap, a silent sentinel. I stared at the door, half expecting it to burst open to reveal the nightmare-made flesh, but it remained closed, as impenetrable as the mystery that tormented me. Maybe they'd be better off locking me up, I mused, the thought spiraling. At least then, I'd know I'm crazy. At least then, I wouldn't be waiting for some fairy tale monster to rip me apart. I rose slowly, limbs heavy with fatigue and fear, and moved to bolt the door. The clunk of the metal sliding home was a note of finality in the symphony that played endlessly in my head. In the reflection of the small, dust-smeared mirror next to the entrance, I caught a glimpse of myself, haggard, eyes wide and darting. Sleep would not visit me that night. Instead, I lay in wait, listening to the sounds of the forest and the creaks of the cabin settling. Or was it something more? Every shadow seemed pregnant with possibility, every noise a prelude to revelation. The line between vigilance and paranoia blurred until it was indistinguishable. As dawn broke, casting feeble light through the gaps in the curtains, I was still awake, staring at the ceiling, the afterimage of the beast etched into the backs of my eyelids. Was it out there, watching, waiting? Or was the true horror confined to the space behind my own eyes? The first rays of morning brought no relief, only the stark awareness that whatever the answer, I was trapped. By the forest, by my mind, or by something far more sinister. The ancient pines whispered secrets outside, a solemn chorus to the oppressive silence that filled my cabin. I sat there alone, the dim flicker of the oil lamp throwing my shadow against the rough logs, like a specter haunting its own grave. The creature weighed on my mind with a presence so real, it was as if the beast itself had taken up residence in my skull. "Damn," I murmured, my voice sounding foreign even to my own ears, a hoarse rasp in a room too long devoid of conversation. It wasn't just the encounters that gnawed at me. It was the whispering doubt, the creeping suspicion that my mind had betrayed me. My hand hovered over the old keepsakes I kept in a battered shoebox. Dog tags that clinked with a hollow sound, a faded photograph of my unit. We were brothers once, forged in the crucible of war. But reaching out to them now, dragging them into this abyss, it felt akin to betrayal. "Should call 'em," I muttered, pushing back against the isolation that clung to me like a second skin. They'd understand, wouldn't they? But words are cheap when you're talking to the ghosts of comradeship. My fingers traced the satellite phone's cold, unyielding contours, but I couldn't will myself to dial. They had their own demons to wrestle with. Didn't need mine adding to the pile. "Christ, Dan, get a grip," I chided myself, my voice cracking as I spoke aloud, trying to fill the void with something other than the echoes of my own thoughts. They'd listen. They always did. Yet, even as I tried to convince myself, I knew the truth. The cage of my solitude was one of my own making, and within its confines, I had become adept at nurturing my paranoia, feeding it scraps of fear until it loomed over me, larger than life. "Hey, it's Dan," I imagined saying into the receiver, the words already tasting bitter with desperation. "Listen, I've been seeing things out here, things that don't make sense. There's something in the woods, something." I stopped, my voice strangled by the absurdity of it all. How could I expect them to understand when I barely grasped it myself? Every attempt to reach out ended before it began, each hypothetical conversation dissolving into the stifling air of the cabin. "Imagining things, man," I could almost hear them say, concern laced with disbelief. Or worse, "Are you sure you're okay?" No, they wouldn't understand. Couldn't. This was my battle to fight, my mind the battleground. And as the night pressed in around me, thick with unseen menace, I settled into the crushing certainty that I was truly, utterly alone. The glow of the laptop screen was a pale specter in the darkness of my cabin, a beacon of modernity intruding upon my self-imposed exile. I sat there, a solitary figure hunched over the keys, the rhythmic tapping a heartbeat in the silence that surrounded me. Operation Nightshade, I typed, invoking the code name from a past life, a thread of camaraderie that still connected me to those who had once stood by my side in the mountains of war. Encrypting the message was second nature, an old habit from darker days. But as my fingers hovered over the send button, doubt crept in like a cold draft through the chinks in the log walls. Encounter at 400 hours, I continued, hesitating as the words formed on the screen. Unidentified entity, resembles canine, but more. The vague description felt like grasping at shadows, trying to capture the essence of a nightmare with mere words. Signs of intelligence, possibly hostile. No known species match. Requesting eyes on the ground for verification. There was a tremor in my hands as I typed, an echo of the uncertainty that gnawed at my insides. Was I crafting a call to arms or a plea for validation? Coordinates are as follows. I pounded out the numbers, each digit a breadcrumb back to this cursed place. Come prepared. Expect the unexpected. My breath came in shallow bursts, each exhale fogging the cold air, as though my very spirit sought escape from the confines of flesh and bone. A laugh, bitter and hollow, escaped my lips. Expect the unexpected. What did I even mean by that? Use extreme caution, I added, a final warning. A last-ditch effort to arm them against the unknown. My gaze lifted from the keyboard, peering into the Stygian blackness beyond the window pane, half expecting red eyes to reflect the moon's pallid light. Out here, we're all prey, I whispered, the admission a weight upon my chest. The encrypted message, now complete, lingered on the screen. Send or delete? The laptop prompted, the question mocking my indecision. With a sigh that seemed to carry the heaviness of my soul, I clicked send. The message vanished into the ether, a secret born on electronic wings to men who might already doubt my grip on reality. God help us all, I said to no one, the words swallowed by the oppressive silence. I closed the laptop with a soft click, severing the tenuous link to the outside world, and turned my face to the darkness that stretched unending before me. The cabin's walls bore down on me like the sides of a pine-scented coffin. I sat there, my breath shallow, trying to stitch together words that could somehow bridge the chasm between experience and expression. The laptop, once a portal to comradeship, now seemed a mockery of human connection, its glow harsh against the encroaching dark. Dan, came Mike's voice through the encrypted line, crackling with static. I got your message. What's this about a man? Dog? You hitting the bottle out there or what? Mike, I swear to you, I began, my tone pleading for understanding. It's not the drink talking. There's something in these woods. Man, look, he countered, his skepticism woven through his measured tones. We've all seen some messed up stuff, but this is wild, even for you. As I listened, my fingers found the old Ranger coin I kept on the table, a tactile reminder of shared duty in battles long past. The cool metal under my thumb was a stark contrast to the feverish uncertainty clouding my mind. Remember the drills, bro. It was James now, his voice rough as gravel roads. Secure, observe, orient. React, I finished for him, the mantra automatic, though it reverberated hollowly within me. Exactly, James continued. You're probably just seeing shadows, Dan. Your head's playing tricks. Tricks don't leave tracks, James, I argued, the memory of clawed footprints etched into the muddy bank by the creek flashing before me. I found prints. Evidence. Could be anything, man, he interjected. A bear, a wolf. Hell, maybe one of those big cats people talk about. Big cats don't stand on two legs, I shot back, frustration mounting. Dan, came the tempered voice of Rodriguez. always the diplomat among us. We're worried about you. All this isolation, it's not good. You might be projecting, right? Like some kind of hypervigilance hangover. My hands clenched into fists at their words, nails digging into my palms until I felt the bite of skin giving way. My body remembered the charge of adrenaline, the instinctual readiness for combat. Yet here I was, fighting phantoms, either of flesh or of the mind. Guys, I'm telling you, there's something unnatural, predatory. I tried to imbue my words with the gravity of my encounters, the visceral fear that had laced my spine with ice. Dan, said Mike, think about it. You're out there, alone, letting your demons run amok. Maybe it's time to come back to civilization, get some help. Help? I echoed the word. Foreign, an admission of defeat. I'm not crazy, Mike. I'm not. Nobody's saying you are, Rodriguez chimed in. But you're talking about monsters, amigo. It's hard to swallow. Then don't swallow it, I snapped, the plea in my voice sharp with anger, but at least consider the possibility. Dan, James sighed. Monsters are for fairy tales and horror flicks. We live in the real world, and in the real world, people snap under pressure. Is that what you think? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, that I've snapped? Brother, Mike said, a note of finality in his tone. We just want you safe. Silence descended as the line went dead. A surge of frustration gripped me, a tidal wave of anger and helplessness that threatened to drag me under. My fingers danced across the keyboard with feral intensity, the clacking of keys, a desperate incantation against the growing dread. Guys, please, I typed, the plea stark against the backdrop of their doubt. I'm not losing it. I know what I saw. But the stream of messages slowed, then stopped. Their avatars, once a comforting presence, now stood as stark reminders of my isolation. The camaraderie we'd forged in the fires of war, it seemed, could not withstand the chill of the unknown. My gaze shifted from the screen to the window, where darkness clung to the glass like a second skin. The wilderness beyond it was a black void where the monster roamed, its howls a symphony for the damned. Damn it, I muttered, dragging my hands down my face. The stubble scratching against my palms felt like braille, spelling out the truth of my predicament. Alone, disbelieved, doubting even my own senses. The cabin groaned as the wind picked up, a mournful dirge for the faith my brothers had lost in me. I slumped back in my chair, the weight of their skepticism a yoke around my neck. The glow from the laptop screen flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced with glee at my distress. Believe me or not, I whispered to the empty room, the monster is real, and with those words hanging in the air, I closed the laptop with a snap, surrendering to the oppressive embrace of the dark. War does things to a man, I said aloud, trying to anchor myself to reality with the sound of my own voice. But the silence that followed swallowed my words, mocking me, my hands clenched and unclenched, seeking something tangible to grasp onto. Maybe they're right. The whisper felt like a betrayal. It slithered through the darkness, a serpent coiling around my resolve. I shook my head violently, as if I could fling the thought away with brute force. Focus, I commanded, stopping mid-pace to stare at the grain of the wood underfoot. Remember your training. But what use was training when the enemy might not even exist, when the adversary could be your own mind? Damn it! The exclamation ripped from my throat, raw and edged with fear. I wouldn't, accept their disbelief. Not completely, yet here I was, pacing like a caged animal caught in the thorns of my fragmented psyche. Enough! The shout bounced off the walls, and I stopped dead, chest heaving with exertion and emotion. There was no answer, only the echo of my own desperation. Show yourself then, I challenged the emptiness, the darkness outside, the shadows within. If you're real, show yourself. Silence was my only reply, a suffocating blanket smothering the flames of my resolve. The stillness was unbearable, each second stretching into eternity, each breath a struggle against the tide of dread rising within me. My heart was a drumbeat, too loud, too fast, echoing through the hollows of my ribcage with a rhythm that spoke of terror. It reverberated in my ears, a tribal call to a battle I couldn't see, against an enemy I wasn't sure existed. A cold sweat slicked my forehead, droplets mingling with the furrows of worry that had become my constant companions. Damn it! I slammed my fist onto the table, the impact jarring but futile against the fortress of my fears. Should kept this to myself, I groaned, the taste of regret, bitter on my tongue. Am I crazy? The question slithered through my thoughts, a serpent coiled around my sanity. Is this what losing your mind feels like? I stood up again, pacing, the creak of the floorboards a mocking chorus to my disquiet. I could feel the weight of my encounters with the creature, real or not, pressing down on me, suffocating me with its intensity. Get a grip, I chastised myself, but self-reproach did nothing to quell the tempest in my mind. The image of the beast, its eyes reflecting moonlight like twin shards of ice, haunted me. The snarl, the growl, the feeling of being hunted. It was all too visceral, too ingrained in every fiber of my being to be mere delusion. Or is it? The thought wound around my heart, squeezing until I could scarcely breathe. God, help me, I pleaded to the empty room, the words dangling in the air, unanswered prayers. And then there was nothing left to do but stare at the screen, the cursor blinking back at me like the ticking of a clock counting down to my inevitable unraveling. There, in the electronic glow of my last connection to the outside world, the sense of impending doom settled over me, a heavy cloak woven from the threads of my broken psyche. Alone, with no one to turn to, no one to believe me, I faced the darkness, both within and without, wondering if I'd ever find my way out of this nightmare. The cabin seemed to pulsate with a malevolent energy as I sat there, consumed by my own thoughts. The darkness outside had transformed into a living, breathing entity, seeping through the cracks in the walls and infiltrating every corner of the room. It clawed at my defenses, testing the fragile boundaries of my sanity. I couldn't escape the nagging doubt that gnawed at me from within. What if I truly had lost touch with reality? What if this creature was nothing more than a manifestation of my own tortured mind? The questions echoed relentlessly, bouncing off the cold, unforgiving walls. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window pane, causing me to jump in my seat. I peered out into the night, searching for any sign of movement, but there was only darkness, endless and impenetrable. The howling winds carried whispers that mingled with the doubts in my head. No, I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible above the raging storm outside. Determination surged within me, pushing aside the suffocating tendrils of fear. I reached for a nearby flashlight, grabbed my rifle and pulled on my jacket, bracing myself against the cold. With each step towards the door, I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins, propelling me forward into the unknown. The wind howled in protest as I stepped out into the night, my feet sinking into the soft earth beneath me. The darkness seemed impenetrable, swallowing everything in its path, but I refused to be swallowed whole. I followed the faint trail that led deeper into the wilderness, guided only by the light of my flashlight and an unwavering instinct. With every step, the chaotic thoughts and doubts that had plagued me began to fade, replaced by a single-minded focus on finding answers. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the air grew thick with an oppressive silence. The trees loomed tall around me, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, clawing at the night sky. Their shadows danced in the beam of my flashlight, casting eerie shapes on the forest floor. My heart pounded against my ribcage, each beat a reminder of the risks I was taking. But I couldn't turn back now. I had to confront this darkness head-on, unravel its secrets, and find the truth buried within. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying with it a low growl that sent shivers down my spine. It was a sound that resonated deep within me, igniting a primal fear that threatened to consume me whole. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, my knuckles turning white. As I pressed on, a sense of unease settled over me, as if unseen eyes watched my every move. Shadows seemed to shift and twist at the periphery of my vision, playing tricks on my mind. But I refused to succumb to the tricks of my own imagination. There was something out here, something that had to be confronted. A sudden rustling in the underbrush made me freeze in my tracks. My heart raced, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I swung the flashlight around, its beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. But there was nothing, only the swaying branches and the deepening silence. Gathering my courage, I pressed forward, each step sinking deeper into the tangled wilderness. The air grew heavy with an otherworldly stillness, as if nature itself held its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Then I saw it, an eerie glow emanating from a clearing up ahead. My heart skipped a beat as curiosity and trepidation mingled within me. Was this the source of the darkness that had plagued my mind? Only one way to find out. With bated breath, I approached the clearing. As I drew closer, I could make out the silhouette of a figure standing in the center, bathed in an ethereal glow. It was tall, its form elongated and hunched, like a creature caught between two worlds. The air crackled with an electric energy, sending a chill down my spine. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice echoing through the stillness of the forest. The figure turned slowly, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. My heart pounded against my chest, threatening to burst forth from its cage of bone. Then I saw a form lying at its feet, crumpled and bloody. As I drew closer, it became clear the body was human. My steps faltered as horror washed over me, freezing me in place. My mind raced, desperately trying to comprehend the scene before me. The figure in front of me was no longer a mere shadow, but a living, breathing entity that stood between me and the lifeless body at its feet. I raised my rifle and fired, a matching explosion of bloody and viscera cascading from the beast's shoulder. It let out a blood-curdling howl and staggered back a bit before turning its gaze on me, eyes filled with rage. With a demoralizing agility, the thing charged straight for me. I emptied my gun into its body as it closed in for the kill, just barely leaping out of the way before it crashed into the tree behind me. I barely had time to scamper to my feet before my pursuer turned and lunged again, catching my shoulder with its razor-sharp claws as I fled. I fell hard, crying out in pain, but there was no escape. The creature loomed over me, its growls reverberating through the forest. Blood seeped from my wounded shoulder, staining the ground beneath me. Fear clutched at my heart, threatening to overwhelm me, but I refused to surrender to this relentless nightmare. I scrambled to my feet, pushing past the pain that radiated through my body. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew deep down that running was futile. This creature would chase me down, relentless in its pursuit, until it claimed my life. With a surge of determination, I reached for a fallen branch and swung it with all my might. The makeshift weapon connected with the creature's jaw, causing it to stagger back momentarily. Seizing the opportunity, I turned and sprinted deeper into the forest, desperate to put distance between us. My lungs burned as I ran, branches whipping against my face and arms. The sense of being hunted only intensified with each passing moment. Every sound, every rustle of the underbrush, every crack of a twig sent a jolt of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could hear the creature's enraged howls growing fainter behind me, but I knew it wouldn't give up so easily. I darted around trees, leaping over fallen logs, my senses heightened to the point of hyper-awareness. The forest became a blur of colors and shapes as I raced through the darkness, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. Fear surged through me like a wild river, threatening to consume me whole, but I refused to let it drown me. A glimmer of moonlight pierced through the dense canopy above, casting an ethereal glow on the forest floor. I veered towards it, hoping for some respite from the relentless pursuit. But as I stepped into the clearing, my heart sank. Before me stood a towering cliff face, jagged rocks reaching towards the sky. It was an abrupt dead end, leaving me with no way out. Panic gripped me, squeezing the air from my lungs. I turned around, desperate to find another path, but the creature emerged from the darkness, blocking my only escape route. Its eyes burned with an insatiable hunger, its snarls vibrating through the stillness of the night. I clutched the branch tightly in my trembling hands, my fingers white with strain. It was a feeble weapon against this monstrous adversary, but it was all I had. With a primal scream, I charged towards the creature. The branch connected with its side, eliciting a guttural roar of pain. But it didn't falter. It retaliated with a swift swipe of its claws, slicing through the air and grazing my leg. I stumbled back, blood oozing from the wound. The pain shot through me like wildfire, threatening to incapacitate me. But there was no time to surrender to weakness now. I had to keep fighting. I mustered every ounce of strength and resilience within me, refusing to let the pain in my leg dictate my fate. With a burst of adrenaline, I lunged at the creature once more, aiming for its vulnerable joints and weak spots. Each strike landed with a satisfying thud as I fought tooth and nail to keep the creature at bay. It retaliated with a fury unmatched, slashing at me with its razor-sharp claws. Blood mingled with sweat as wounds opened up on both sides, painting a gruesome tableau of our battle. Time seemed to stand still as we clashed in that moonlit clearing, each blow carrying the weight of survival. Desperation fueled my movements, enabling me to anticipate the creature's attacks, dodging and parrying with a newfound agility. The fight became a dance of life and death, a primal struggle for dominance and existence. The air crackled with tension as our battle raged on, the forest bearing witness to this primal duel between man and beast. My body screamed with exhaustion, muscles burning and limbs heavy. The wounds inflicted by the creature throbbed with a searing pain, threatening to weaken my resolve. But I fought through it, drawing strength from some hidden reservoir deep within me. With one final surge of energy, I delivered a crushing blow to the creature's skull, sending it crashing to the ground. It lay there for a moment, its body racked with spasms, before finally falling still. I stood there panting heavily, my entire being consumed by an intoxicating mix of relief and disbelief. I had survived against all odds, defying the very forces that sought to claim my life. I sank to my knees, the weight of the battle finally catching up to me. Blood dripped from my wounds, mingling with the dirt and leaves beneath me. The silence of the forest settled in around me, broken only by the soft rustling of the wind through the trees. But even in this moment of respite, I knew my fight wasn't over. The creature may have been defeated, but there was no telling what other horrors lurked within this forsaken wilderness. I needed to find a way out, a way back to civilization where I could tend to my injuries and make sense of the chaos that had consumed my life. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I forced myself to stand. Each movement sent a jolt of agony through my battered body, but I refused to let it deter me. I glanced back one last time at the fallen beast, its lifeless form a reminder of the darkness that had threatened to consume me. I returned for the body and wondered briefly if I might join the poor soul in the grave. My wounds were severe, and I'd have to make it back to the cabin if I wanted to reach the satellite phone to call for some kind of help. Reluctantly, I left the unidentified victim where I'd found him, resolving to come again with more manpower. As I made my way through the thick underbrush, the pain in my leg intensified with every step. Blood soaked through the torn fabric of my pants, leaving a trail behind me. The moon had disappeared behind a blanket of clouds, plunging the forest into an impenetrable darkness. But I pressed on, fueled by a desperate need to survive. The cabin was my only lifeline, a sanctuary that held the means to contact the outside world. With each labored breath, I forced myself to push forward, driven by a grim determination to reach safety. The weight of the creature's presence still lingered in the air, haunting my every step. After what felt like an eternity of stumbling through the blackened woods, I caught sight of the flickering glow that emanated from the cabin in the distance. Relief washed over me like a cool wave as I quickened my pace, ignoring the agony coursing through my wounded body. With trembling hands, I fumbled for the keys. They slipped from my grasp and hit the ground with a metallic clang, but the urgency that propelled me forward gave me the strength to quickly retrieve them. I jammed the key into the lock, praying that it would turn without resistance. It did, and I swung the door open, stumbling inside. The cabin was bathed in a dim glow from the flickering fire in the hearth. It cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an eerie ambience that mirrored the horrors I had just faced outside. My breath came in ragged gasps as I collapsed onto the worn-out couch, seeking solace in its familiar embrace. I reached for the satellite phone sitting on the coffee table, my hands trembling uncontrollably. The pain in my leg throbbed with a relentless intensity, making it difficult to focus on anything else. Sweat trickled down my forehead as I dialed the emergency number, praying for a connection. After what felt like an eternity, a voice crackled through the static-filled line. Relief flooded over me as I explained my dire situation, my words tumbling out in a jumble of desperation and urgency. The operator assured me that help was on the way, but it would take time. Time was a luxury I couldn't afford. My wounds were worsening by the second, and I needed immediate medical attention. With a surge of determination, I pushed myself off the couch and made my way to the small bathroom in the corner of the cabin. The room was cramped and dimly lit, but it held all the essentials I needed. I reached for the first aid kit, hoping it contained enough supplies to stabilize my condition. As I rummaged through its contents, my heart sank. It was practically empty, with only a few bandages and antiseptic wipes remaining. I knew I had to make do with what little I had. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I tore open a bandage and began cleaning the deep gashes on my leg. The antiseptic burned as it made contact with my raw flesh, but I welcomed the pain as a sign that I was still alive. Blood continued to seep from the wounds, refusing to clot. Panic threatened to overwhelm me as I realized the gravity of my situation. If I didn't stop the bleeding soon, I would lose consciousness and succumb to my injuries. With shaky hands, I reached for a roll of medical tape and tightly wrapped it around my leg, applying as much pressure as I could bear. The makeshift tourniquet slowed the bleeding, but it was only a temporary solution. I needed proper medical assistance, and I needed it now. I stumbled back into the main room of the cabin, pain coursing through every fiber of my being. The fire in the hearth crackled with a mocking intensity, casting dancing shadows on the walls that mirrored my inner turmoil. The minutes ticked by, and I struggled to stay conscious. At some point, I must have failed, because I awoke to find myself being strapped to a stretcher. A rescue team had made it out to me, but only just in time. As the paramedics carried me out of the cabin and into the waiting ambulance, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, lurking in the shadows. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months as I lay in a hospital bed, my body slowly healing from the wounds inflicted upon me. Physical therapy became a daily routine, each session a painful reminder of the battle I had fought and barely survived. The authorities had searched the surrounding forest extensively, but their efforts yielded no trace of the beast or its victims. It was as if they had vanished without a trace, swallowed by the unforgiving wilderness that held its secrets close. At this point, everyone just thinks I was attacked by a bear or a wolf, that my mind conjured some unknown horror to cope with the trauma I experienced. But that isn't the only thing bothering me. I'm due for release tomorrow, and I'll finally be getting out of this place. I should be happy, at least for that. But something in me feels changed. I can't quite describe it, and I wouldn't dare mention it to the staff for fear they'll keep me longer. My returning strength seems to have brought with it a sharper sense of smell than I remember, and my appetite seems to have grown to match. Probably nothing to complain about, but the sudden changes are alarming. After everything I've experienced, so many close calls, I can't help but wonder if this time is different. My unease just makes me all the more eager to get back out there, back to my place of solitude. Perhaps then, I can finally heal the part of me that can't be fixed with stitches, plaster, and medication.